Well, hi, I'm Dr. Michael McDonald, and thank you for joining me in this video, which will should be a very fun video, and about Plato's Allegory of the Cave. And this one is called the Shamanistic Interpretation. And I think it's unusual. It's different from what we've seen put forward in other places. As I mentioned in some of the earlier videos, this video is part of a series of videos that are all about Plato's Allegory of the Cave. And he wrote this allegory, of course, at the height of his career in ancient Greece during the Golden Period, and used the allegory of the cave in order to illustrate his own philosophy, and always associated the allegory with a divided line. This fits in with our definition of allegory that we used in the series, which was that an allegory is a consciously created symbol that has many different profound and meaningful interpretations, but those interpretations are all related to each other. And in the series as a whole, I presented this material first at the Osher Institute for Lifelong Learning in Palm Desert, California. And I had a lot of requests to go ahead and put it on YouTube. And there isn't anything quite like it in the sense that we are presenting 7 different interpretations. Many of those different from what Plato could have had in mind when he wrote the allegory, but that's the power of a symbol, is that it's so deeply true, and true in so many ways, that we find that we can apply it to situations in the modern world and in ways that are deeply meaningful. So I hope you'll visit all of the videos in this series, especially if you're unclear who Plato is and how he relates to Socrates and all of that. We covered that in the early videos. The shamanistic interpretation is kind of original to me, I believe. Although the basic notions have been developed in terms of, the idea of what is a cave and what goes on in caves. And there's been some recent breakthrough material, I would say, based on the works of shamanism, studies of shamanism and cave art by David Louis Williams, Merci Eliade, and especially Graham Hancock. And while this material is somewhat speculative, I do find it interesting, and I do find it plausible. What is so amazing is the number of ancient caves that have been discovered and how far back they go. Some of these caves go back to possibly 45,000 BCE, cave art being done by Neanderthals as well as Homo sapiens. And it's clear that, caves would have been original homes. They would have been a kind of refuge for early humans. So by looking just at this interpretation, the shamanistic interpretation is really focusing almost exclusively on the idea of the cave and what that has represented in our human experience. And taking this kind of approach to Plato's analogy, and it enables us to ask a number of different questions than the ones that we asked in our earlier interpretations. Now, a second aspect of this interpretation, especially by Graham Hancock, is the idea that what you had in early cave art was probably a rendering of visions that were obtained by taking psychoactive drugs, whether that included mushrooms or the kind of mixture that is called ayahuasca. And this is all based on the activities of modern shamans. And many of them actually do their initiation ceremonies in caves. And what Graham Hancock in particular is proposing is that, hey, a lot of the imagery that we see in these really, really ancient cave drawings, some of which have, great artistic merit, very much resemble the kind of visions that anybody would have today if they also took ayahuasca or exposed themselves to the mushrooms or other vision producing substances. And we know that that's an important part of shamanistic practice. Usually what the shaman is doing, and this is in a lot of different cultures, is making a journey into the spirit world. And yes, they do take a psychoactive substance, usually DMT is the molecule, but it can be other molecules, psilocybin and so forth, that affect the consciousness in such a way that the person begins to see what we call visions. And of course, the dismiss word for this is hallucinations, but not from the shamanistic standpoint. From the shamanistic standpoint, this is a real journey into a real world with real encounters, with real spiritual entities that are separated from us by just being in the next dimension. And as we retune our consciousness, we begin to see them. And not only that, the journey can be either helpful or harmful, because not all the spirits are always good spirits. But if it's helpful, then the shaman can return with powers to heal, or visionary powers to be able to identify with particular animals, or to perhaps travel to faraway places and see what's going on. So the shaman and then the shaman can gain healing powers and be able to cure somebody who has an illness. And what we have to understand is that this is a cross-cultural interpretation. So we have to be ready to see these activities not with our stereotypes from our culture about what drugs are and what's real and what's a hallucination. And I advise you that the word hallucination is just a dismiss word that kind of assumes its own conclusion. You know, it assumes that it's meaningless, and therefore goes ahead and makes up a word that makes it sound meaningless. It's not meaningless to the shamans. And actually, person after person after person who engages, for example, ayahuasca, does have very similar meetings or encounters with what are called theriatropic figures that are half human, maybe partly snake and partly human, or half human and animal parts as well. So with the journey to the underworld, you're meeting with various kinds of demons or spirits, and in these encounters, you can succeed and come back with special powers or special insights into the world that we know. So let's look at this in terms of the a fourfold layout. And again, go back to the early videos if you don't understand that Plato set this up in terms of a divided line that had 4 stages, and 2 of them take place inside the cave and 2 of them when you get outside the cave. In this case, being inside the cave is going to be associated with the shamanistic initiation ceremonies. And rather than the prisoners sitting in the cave and sort of being entranced by images, what you have is kind of a trans-dimensional experience going on inside the cave itself that results at the very least in the creation of cave art. Now, inside the cave, Plato had a fire, and that would be the case, of course. These early caves had to be illuminated by torches. And it's kind of interesting that in a lot of the cases, the cave people, or our ancient ancestors, be they Neanderthal or human, had to crawl quite a distance with their torches to get down to the areas where the art was made. And so, that's kind of literal, that you're lit up by torchlight. And everybody will agree that there's something kind of magical about torchlight and about being in a cave and the reflections that you see in there, particularly if the shaman is conducting ceremonies or if you have a psychoactive drug. And so whatever encounter is taking place inside the cave is being mediated here by a shaman. And I've kind of put down the idea of magical thinking. Now, I don't mean that to be entirely pejorative. I know that a lot of anthropologists would dismiss such and say that, well, the reason that they put up the bison herds on the wall of the cave was magical thinking. And that would be what Eliade calls the participation mystique, which means I'm not different from the world and the things are not different from their images. And if I can control the image of the buffalo and put a spear in that buffalo down here in the cave, then that will be to my advantage tomorrow on the hunt when I encounter the real buffalo, because I will have already pierced with the spear. You know what I mean? I would have already been, in my mind, successful in the hunt. This has to do, the magical thinking also has to do with identification with the animals. But again, we would think that, well, there's a fourfold story here. I know that a lot of anthropologists today would kind of go, gee, Michael, I'm wondering if we move from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3, to get out of the cave, we're leaving the area of magical thinking. And wouldn't that be the rise of science? You know, when we start to use our rational mind, when we start to get out into the light of day. And isn't science this objective thing that you're saying? You're out of the cave now and you're looking at things in an objective light. And you're also recording for the first time the activities of the real things around you. Making note of the regularities, and we have the beginning of science and the use of the rational mind to understand the world, which, is far superior, you know, to that magical thinking. And then I would not agree with that wholeheartedly, but there is some element of truth that we could look to. With this interpretation, we could look to a kind of historically based interpretation and wonder if humanity as a whole has moved from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3, and if we're on the verge of stage 4, which would be a kind of cosmic awareness, and finding a reality that is a truer reality where we see ourselves as human beings in a cosmic context. And of course, the exploration of space, we're starting to learn more and more about our cosmic context. Everything about dark matter and the material that's coming in through science does seem to be opening the door to life on other planets, is considered by most scientists to be highly, highly, highly likely. We've seen how many other planets are exactly like ours and so forth. So the chances that there might be life on other planets and that life might be intelligent and that we might be part and parcel, if they are more advanced than they are, maybe they not visit us in spaceships, you know, that they've flown this distance, but maybe the phenomenon of aliens and UFOs is more of a trans-dimensional situation. Whitley Strieber has put this forward in his recent works. And some of you may know that Whitley Strieber is one of the first that sort of broke the mold in the United States by, going from his career as a novelist to all of a sudden writing what he was saying was nonfiction, a book called Communion, in which he was visited by aliens. And he has come to see that as a trans-dimensional experience. And to put forward, I would say, on the good side of the UFO debates today, there's actually a lot more intelligent thinking going on and a lot more evidence than what ordinary people might believe. So it isn't that we think that people are flying trillions of miles faster than light, but we think that with advances in consciousness, such as we would project, the human race has certainly, we have taken advances, haven't we, as we went from the 45,000-year-old hunter-gatherer caveman type of awareness forward through magical thinking and identification with animals, and then to the world of science, and then possibly to stage 4, where we're starting to discover, wait a minute, even science wasn't telling us, it was telling us what we wanted to hear in many ways. But science also had a lot of stereotypes and assumptions built into it that science itself begins breaking down at the point that we really start to look at what's going on in our cosmic context. There are so many planets that just like Earth are in that Goldilocks area, which totally means oceans and mountains and water, and with bacteria even being present on meteors and asteroids that strike the Earth. Well, those same meteors and asteroids are striking other planets as well. So the seeds of life could have gotten going. And if that had happened on planets that were, different in their time frame, they got their start, even 500,000 years before our own, let alone 1,000,000 years before our own. Who knows what possibilities of consciousness might have emerged in those kinds of settings. So I understand that this is the shamanistic interpretation is speculative, and it emphasizes actually, though, all 4 stages of Plato's Allegory of the Cave. So I do offer it here for your consideration. I hope that you will also join me for a more complete explanation of, the 4 stages in Plato's Allegory in the other videos in the series. Okay, so I'm Dr. Michael McDonald, and it's been my pleasure to present this for you today, and I hope you'll tune in again soon to see other videos from the Allegory of the Cave series. See you soon. Bye.